Hello and welcome to This Week from the Principal's Desk, where we look at topics facing Lutheran school principals and figure out if there's any way we can help. We always love to do that. My name is Rob Lunak. I'm the principal at Mount Calvary Lutheran School, and my co-host is Mike Sheeman.
Hi, Rob. My name is Mike Sheeman. I'm principal at Bethany Lutheran School in Parma, Ohio, just outside of Cleveland. And today I'm looking forward to our topic today because I think it's the one that every principal has to deal with, but also maybe dreads a little bit at the same time. Would you agree with that?
I definitely would. So this week we're actually going to be talking about discipline, which I think if nobody got in trouble, school would be great. It'd be the happiest place in the world, but we are sinful human beings, so sometimes we do make poor decisions, and it is the principal's job a lot of the time to clean that up and work with that.
Absolutely. And I feel like now that we're a few weeks into the school year, the honeymoon period has ended. It's quite likely by now you're starting to face some of these discipline issues. And for principals, it's always that tension of how do you love the kid and proclaim the gospel when discipline in and of itself is really rooted in the law. We talk about the law as, of course, our curb, our mirror, and our rule, but applying that needs to go hand in hand with the gospel. So it's certainly a tension that we face as principals, but it's always the prayer that we can get our students to that point where they understand what they've done was wrong and they're ready for the big old hug, you know.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those stickier topics for principals because you'll hear a lot, "Well, aren't you a Christian school?" And absolutely we are, but that doesn't mean there are no consequences. We can definitely forgive your kid, we definitely love your kid, but that doesn't mean that there are no consequences for poor behavior.
That's right. Rob, you bring up a good point because even in our admission interviews, I get asked that question a lot. Well, what does discipline look like at your school? And typically my answer to the parents is that, you know what, kids are kids. So I'm not going to sugarcoat this. What you see at all the other schools and you see these things happening, kids go through those stages. That's going to happen here. Our question is, how do we deal with that? And I think that's where you're going to see the difference is that Lutheran schools value partnerships with the families. And so we're not going to discipline in isolation. It's a matter of involving the parents in every step of the way so that we can work together as school and home to benefit the kids.
Yeah, that's the only way it works. It's like the legs of a stool, right? The kid needs to be doing what they're supposed to be doing, the school needs to be doing what they're supposed to be doing, and the parents need to be doing what they're supposed to be doing. You take any of those away, and it's tough. So I've had situations where the parent is fantastic working with me, but their kid has just decided that they don't want to listen to anybody, they don't want to do what they're supposed to do, and there's nothing we can do to convince them. And kids don't come with a manual, right? If your kid listens to you all the time, you are the best parent in the world, and I have a plaque for you. I know my kid doesn't listen to me all the time, and I haven't met one yet that's perfect.
Absolutely. And not only a plaque, but you should write a book and make your millions. I mean, right?
That is true. I'll help you publish it.
Yeah, for sure. But I would venture that discipline in and of itself, it needs to start with a root that happens well before any situation happens. A student needs to know first and foremost that they're loved and that they're in a safe place because they are going to mess up. Every single kid will mess up in some way, shape, or form. When they walk in my office because they've made a bad choice, the first thing that they know is that they're walking into a office that has somebody that cares about them. I'm not going to be unfair. I'm not going to yell. I'm not going to come down from the top, but I'm going to sit next to them and just say, what happened? And out of love, listen to what they've said took place. So that the teachers and everybody needs to invest first and foremost in that relationship, which is really going to help guide the discipline.
Yeah, it's always better when a kid comes in and they look at you and they go, Mr. Lunak, I messed up. And you go, great, let's talk about that. Why don't you explain to me what happened? And there's always an opportunity to fix that. And I always let the kid know that you may have damaged things, right? You may have damaged relationships with your peers or with your teacher, but those are fixable, right? Because we have a God that loves us and he forgave you just like he forgives me. And trust me, kid, I've made plenty of mistakes on my own as well, right? And isn't it so great that we have the opportunity to work through those and the opportunity to grow through those? But that doesn't mean that that growth is always going to be painless because sometimes consequences hurt and consequences hurt so you don't do it again. That's kind of the point of them.
That's right. That's right. And then to be able to move forward and I always go back to the passages in Scripture about how our sins are as far as the east is from the west, or though they were as scarlet, they are now white as snow through the blood of the Lamb. That to reassure the kids that we are going to deal with this, but then we move on, and we're going to move on with a changed heart through the power of the Holy Spirit, and with new information and new outlooks on how we can deal with people and with situations. So the one thing, Rob, I'm curious, at your school, tell me a little bit about your discipline policies, because every school has this book on the shelf, right?
If you don't have anything written down, you should definitely get something written down. And that doesn't mean that you're stuck to it, but it at least gives everybody a roadmap of where to go. So for us, we have ours broken down. We're a 4K through 8th grade school, and we have 4K through 5th grade has a policy, and 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, which is our middle school, they have a policy, and they're similar. But there's a little more lenience for things like being out of line, talking, things like that at the lower grades than there are maybe at the upper grades. At the upper grades, our expectations are higher. You're our oldest students. You've been with us the longest. We expect you to be models for everybody else. So we're a little more particular, I guess I would say, about some of that because you know how everything's supposed to run and you know what we expect out of you. Our behavior rubric, we call it, covers things like horseplay, disrespect, unkind words or actions. Those are kind of our big buckets that we lump everything into. And then we really try and put a lot of the onus back on the kid. So if you do something and you need to be sent to the office, you're calling your parents. I'm sitting there. I'll put them on speaker, but you are going to call and explain to them what went on. And then I'm there to answer any questions they have and to make sure that you're giving them that whole version. Because a lot of the time, I'll get a kid sent in and they'll talk to mom, and there's this really long story. And then there's the little bit they did, and then they kind of gloss over that. I go, whoa, hang on. I'm glad you're talking to mom, but let's backtrack a little bit because you're here for this reason, and you really glossed right over that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Oh, kids like to paint themselves in the best possible light that they can find and deflect that. I love how you've staggered your discipline policy based on kind of grades and expectations. I think there's a lot of wisdom in there. I know that the parents too, when schools publish discipline policies and their kid gets in trouble, I've had parents that have gone straight to that manual to say, well, it says here you need to do this, this, and this. And just when I thought too, I've got a discipline policy that covers everything, something comes down that I had no expectation would ever happen. And so one of the things that I've learned over many years is to be able to write policy in a way that it can be applied to specific situations, even beyond that, applied to specific kids, because God created each one unique and special. And what's going to work for one isn't going to work for another. I had a teacher that always talked about fair versus equal. And we want to make sure that it not necessarily providing equal discipline equates to fair discipline. There's a differentiation there. So what is going to work for one kid may not work for another, because the goal is to reconcile and change the behaviors. And so I think if we have that as the goal, that freedom to move within it is so vital for administrators.
Absolutely. So we have a sentence in our policy which is very important, and it says that situations may dictate consequences or plans not listed here. The school can make these decisions, right? We maintain the authority to change this if needed. On our discipline rubric, if a kid gets to the fourth incident of something, we actually create a specific plan for them that's not on that piece of paper. That is just them. We sit down with their parents and their teacher, and we say, hey, here are all the things we've had. What do we now need to do together as a team to make sure that we're not continuing down this path we're on?
Right. Because like we've said, at the end of the day, the goal is changing that behavior. And how do we make that happen? Now, have you ever had an experience where you've worked with a child and you've worked so hard to change the behavior, it just would not change, and there was nothing that you felt you'd done everything and opportunities were exhausted?
Yeah, unfortunately, sometimes you hit a point where a kid needs to be suspended or dismissed from your school, and it's really unfortunate, and no principal likes doing it. Trust me, no principal wakes up in the morning and says, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to suspend somebody today. We hate those decisions, and we will avoid them if we can. If there's any other way, we really do try that other way first, I promise you. But every once in a while, you get a kid, luckily rarely, who just cannot keep up with what they need to be doing. And when that happens, talk to parents. And a lot of the time, especially if I have a parent that is working with us and understands what we're trying at school, I'll give them an option. I'll say, hey, we're to that point now where I don't know if your kid's going to be able to continue at Mount Calvary. And you've been great, and I don't want to put an expulsion on their record, but I don't know if they can remain here, right? And I try to give some of those parents who work with us the option of withdrawing their kid. That way they don't have to have that mark. And I hope that another school is a better fit, right? Maybe it just wasn't a good environment for that kid. Maybe there was some kid they didn't get along with, and a new environment would be more helpful. So if I can give them that option, I try to.
For sure. For sure. No, and I think, and one of the things that's helped me out, and I need to get better at this, but it's documentation. So to be able not just to write the situation out, but when we meet with the parents, to have some sort of a parental agreement or a contract or something, even if you meet and then after the fact you develop this, but then to bring everybody in and sign it. And I like to divide it into sections. Here's what the school has agreed to do. Here's what the parents have agreed to do. And here's what the students have agreed to do. And if we can get on the same page with that and it's in writing, it's very, very clear. There's no question as to what the next steps will be. But I always like to start it with a paragraph, grace-based paragraph, stating, we love your child and we want nothing more than to continue on in education with your child at our school. Given that, this is how that's possible. And so the documentation is vital, and it's worth the time that it takes to sit down and do it, even though it can be tedious.
Yeah, that's a great idea, having a very delineated duties and responsibilities for everybody. That's great because everyone knows where everyone's at, and it's a partnership at that point. It's not the school saying, hey, your kid must do X. It's the school saying, we're agreeing to do all these things to help your child. Right now, your kid needs to do these things, and you need to do these things. That's a great idea, Mike.
For sure. Yeah, and one of the things I've worked to do as well, and this is a tough one because I've been in schools where the suspension policy has stated that the student doesn't get to do their work, or they miss their work, or they get zeros. I've always wrestled with that does discipline equate to behavioral change, or are we trying to bring in academics on that? I know there's many, many sides to this fence, but personally, I've always said that I feel I don't want discipline to impact a student academically, and I've always erred on the side of let them do their work, let's let it count, because at the end of the day, I still need to know academically where this kid is at. And so their misbehavior on the playground or online or wherever is a separate topic from how they are academically as a student. Have you had any experiences with that or thoughts there?
Yeah, I've always viewed it that if a kid gets sent to the office, their discipline, whether that's they spend some time in the office, they have a talk with me, we call their parents, in severe cases, maybe suspending the kid, is separate from their academic work. We're effectively punishing them twice if I'm saying, hey, you're suspended and you're getting zeros, right? Your grades have very little to do with your behavior unless your behavior is impacting your academics, right? But that shows up in the classroom in other ways. We don't need to take other opportunities away from a kid if they're still doing that work.
For sure.
Yeah.
The other topic that I had written down to discuss a bit here too is retaining student dignity through discipline, because one of the things is when students misbehave, it's very public. It'll happen in a way that other kids know. So how do you retain their dignity? Because they're going to know, hey, this kid's been gone for a few days, or, oh, you got sent to the principal's office. How do you keep that from making a target on the kid's back from the others who know what happened? How do you handle that?
I've always viewed discipline as between the school, the kid, and that family, and nobody else. So this is a question I've gotten more in the past couple of years than I did years previous, which is, well, what happened to the other kid? And my answer is always, well, that's between me and them and me and their parents, and that's not between you and them. You're not the one disciplining them. You don't get to know that information. Just like I'm not going to share if your kid got in trouble with somebody else. And some parents are okay with that, but I've noticed more lately, parents really want to know what happened to that other child. And so trying to balance that dignity and also let parents know that, hey, we do take care of issues, right? Because sometimes people think if they don't know about it, it didn't happen. And if you have a good, trusting relationship with your school families, you generally get less of those questions.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I like what you said there. I always use a little empathy. I can't say what happened to that student just because, how would you feel if the other parent was asking me and I shared what happened with your child? And parents seem to melt a little bit at that point. And if you got the parent, oh, it's fine, you can tell them whatever you want. Well, that's great, but not everybody feels that way. And so we need to make sure that we protect and love the child even through discipline.
Yeah, because our point is not to make anybody feel bad. Our point is not to to say, hey, look how terrible you are. Our point is we want you to grow and be better. If we didn't think you had the opportunity to grow and be better, we wouldn't discipline you. You just wouldn't be at the school anymore, right? So the fact that there is continuing discipline if something goes wrong is really a sign of the commitment to the relationship that we have, because we know that Jesus loves your kid just like we love your kid, and we want them to be the best version of themselves.
Absolutely. And so all through the discipline measures and how this all goes, any opportunity we have to relate this to the forgiveness of sins given to us by Jesus every single day, that's why we're in Lutheran schools. That's why we get to do this, is to be able to show them the transformative power of Christ in their lives, that Philippians 4:13, they can change because in Christ they can do all things, and God is with them, guiding them and leading them through that change as they're called to love Jesus and love others.
Absolutely. Now, Mike, I have one more question for you before we wrap this up. If you had a way to message the very brand new principal version of yourself, it's your first principal job, right? You're getting advice from the future. What is one thing you would tell yourself to do with discipline that would be helpful?
Don't shy away from it. If your gut is telling you that something is going on, follow your gut, because God's given you your gut for a reason. But then also, I think the one thing I would say is the sooner you can get a parent involved, the better. Even if it's a call to a parent just to say, hey, I'm watching out for this. I just want you to be aware. Maybe you want to talk to your child tonight. I'm concerned something might be going on. If you can see those things ahead of time, take that time and invest 10 minutes now instead of hours and hours of emails and misunderstandings and grapevine later. It would be a huge help down the road.
That's great advice. That is fantastic.
What about you? What's the same question to you? What's the one thing you would tell yourself?
I would say my first year as principal, I wasn't super comfortable with myself in the position yet, right? I had this vision of what principal should be, and so I was maybe a little more fire and brimstone than I needed to be. And so just be comfortable with yourself, and just because somebody else is mad about something doesn't mean you need to be mad about it. Sometimes you will have a teacher who's really fired up because they've been with that kid all day and that kid just kind of got under their skin, because sometimes kids do get sent to the office for minor things. It does happen. And you don't need to discipline that kid the way somebody else would want them to be disciplined, because that's your call as principal. So be comfortable in that and just make those decisions based on your best judgment, and try not to let some of those expectations feed into that.
Great advice. Great advice. Well, I hope through our conversation, anybody listening just maybe had some thoughts or some ideas. It spurred something on. Of course, you can reach out to either one of us with questions that you have. If you want to continue the conversation, we'd be more than happy to do it.
Yeah, it's always fun talking to everybody and helping everybody out. So I hope everyone has a good week.
God bless.
Bye.